So, defining the small in big data. Of course, big data, very, very large, ocean of information. We're looking for, small little nuggets of insights. I mean, what does it mean to define the small in big data? Fern, what's your take on that?
Well, I always come at everything from an analytics perspective, so I, would think about it in terms of analysis, and generally in analysis, the goal is to find insight. So to me, the small is that insight, and the big, obviously, as you mentioned, is all of that big data. And, with big data, you can utilize more attributes, for example, to find that nugget of information so that you can find better insight or patterns that you never thought about before. So whereas before, maybe you could only look at 100 attributes if you were trying to gain some insight in something. With big data, you could actually look at thousands or more attributes, and you may see correlations and patterns that you never even thought to think about before. So that's getting at the small and the big.
And I just would like to add, Fern, I mean, one reason why we've been talking about finding the small, and we think it's so important, is because with big data, there is an emphasis on the volume and the huge volumes of data that companies are having to deal with, whether that's in looking at email, social media data. And yet, we really want to make the point that it's all about finding the business value and looking for those patterns and anomalies that you can find in your analysis of large volumes and different types of data.
Judith, your sense? I guess I would also, I would ask as part of the question, the small, we're finding the small in big data, but that small could be extremely important. The fact that it's small doesn't mean it's unimportant.
Absolutely. So when we think about getting to the small, one of the other aspects of this is to think about when we go to ask a question of the data that we have. And typically, when we do that, we are dealing with a subset of the world of data that's out there. So sometimes if we see some anomalies in that data, our first assumption is that's probably a mistake. Somebody did a data entry error, or that's something that's not important. It's when you open the aperture wider and you start to look at more attributes, more pieces of data, that you begin to see that, in fact, this is not an anomaly. It isn't happening often when I just look at a small amount of data. If I'm looking at a massive amount of data, then what appeared 5 or 6 or even 100 times now may appear 10,000 times.
A recurring pattern.
The other thing I'd like to add into that, it's also not enough just to look at patterns, because those patterns have to be in the right context so that they mean something. So, for example, if I see a correlation between, there are all these people who buy blue pens that also buy paper towels. That may be true, and the data may show me this, but it may not mean anything in the context of my business.
Unless it means your pens are leaking, Judith.
That could be.
The correlation.
I never thought about it quite that way.
But of course, if your pens are leaking in the world of big data, you need to see like 15 pens leaking, not just 1 or 2. We need recurring patterns, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. And with those recurring patterns, you might be able to, in a more serious situation, or if you're making pens and they're leaking, it is serious.
Right.
But you can correct before it becomes a big problem. You're able to adjust, whether it's your manufacturing process, whether it's your outreach to customers. You can make your corrections early in the game and be more successful.